Welcome to another book club meeting, although this one is the paper and not an actual book. This meeting is being recorded and will be publicly available on the GCAS YouTube channel, so feel free to keep your videos off, even when speaking if you prefer. That's fine. There's no pressure. We want to ensure an inclusive environment, so, we can disagree, but let's do so peacefully. I don't want to boot anybody from the call, but if you get booted, feel free to come back at another meeting, just not this one. Please raise your hand if you're outside the panel, just so that we give everyone a chance to speak and to ask their questions. And you can also chat in the actual message chat as well. That's also fine. And now I will give the panelists the chance to introduce themselves. We'll start with Eva because this book and paper were her suggestions.
Hi, yeah, glad my suggestion made it finally. I'm really looking forward to discussing the book next month. And today we're actually discussing the first chapter of the book, one of the papers. But yeah, I'm Eva. I'm a PhD candidate at GCAS, and I'm researching the humane and existential dimensions of the fear of becoming obsolete. Which is affecting millions of workers today, and I'm focusing on knowledge workers. So I'm looking also into embodiment and how we are being disembodied at work in some way affects our condition today.
And Maria.
Hello, I'm Maria. I'm a PhD student at Maynooth University in Ireland and a researcher at GCAS. I mostly look at how emotion impacts language, but my background is computer science, so I sit in on these mostly for yelling about technology, which is what we are always doing. It's great.
And I am Tessina Moloney. I am also a PhD researcher at GCAS, like Eva. And my topic focuses mostly on how AI is impacting the labor market and the people that are behind that labor market, the workers. And this paper and the author's thoughts are especially important to me because of the imagery of the cyborg, which is also very important to my work, although I use the cyborg a little differently. Nevertheless, there's definitely a lot of overlap with this paper. So I have many thoughts and feelings about what was said, but we will start with Eva so she can tell us a little bit about the author and just a quick run through of the paper if you didn't get the chance to read it yet.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to give a quick introduction about the author first. I think one thing that really it was fun to see was her background in chemistry. So she got a master's degree in chemistry before completing her doctorate in English literature. So I think that can make us feel, reassured about all of our winding academic paths and interdisciplinary paths that we are prone to, especially at GCAS. But to give a more complete overview of the author, her name is Katherine Hayles, and she is a pioneering American literary scholar and media theorist whose work bridges the gap between the sciences and the humanities. She was born in 1943, so also super impressive. Her latest book came out not so long ago, so very much still in the game. She earned her master's degree in chemistry from Caltech before shifting focus to her doctorate in English literature. She's widely recognized as a foundational figure in posthuman studies, media theory, and digital humanities. Her landmark 1999 book, How We Became Posthuman, reshaped how we think about technology, critiquing the idea that information can exist independently of the physical body, and exploring how humans and machines are deeply interconnected. She's also a champion of electronic literature, treating digital-born texts with the same rigorous critical attention reserved for classic print. Her later work explores how our digital environment alters human cognition, contrasting our traditional capacity for deep focus with the hyper-attention required by modern media streams. Yeah, I think that will do it for some information about her. And we can also do a quick overview of the paper itself to get us started. So in the paper, and Katherine Hayles argues that we are talking about metaphors, and she says that the metaphors we use to describe AI are more than the decorative speech. They actually channel our thoughts in specific directions and shape how we design these technologies. And because the field of AI is dominated by a narrow demographic, we all know who that is. She explores how different metaphors can limit or empower a more diverse group of creators to participate. So she first looks at the cyborg metaphor by Donna Haraway, and she says that while it originally helped feminists challenge rigid social binaries, she says that it became too tied to military interests and it's still too anthropocentric. So it stays focused on the human body. So it cannot truly account for the increasing agency of intelligent artificial systems. Then she moves on to Haraway's concept of making kin and the related idea of symbiosis. Maybe someone can correct it, which describes the way that different living systems produce one another through their relations. So Hale says these are powerful metaphors that support environmental justice and recognize our ties to other living creatures, with which Haraway talks about creatures. She also finds this insufficient for AI because they are really focused on biological organisms with long evolutionary histories, which artificial systems don't have. And then she addresses another historical metaphor, which is man-computer symbiosis, proposed by Leak Leader, who is also known as the Leak, apparently. And she finds his view also limited, even though she considers him kind of visionary in ability to predict how this will develop later. This is a metaphor from 1960. So she says it's limited because it treated the computer as a mere tool meant to help a human master who still set all the goals, rather than recognizing the computer as an independent cognitive agent. And based on this, finally, she moves on to propose her own metaphor, which is technosymbiosis. And this is a concept built on what she calls ecological reciprocity, which is the idea that humans and non-human organisms and AI are all cognitive agents that receive, interpret, and act on information within their unique environments. And in this view, we all operate within cognitive assemblage, which the collectivities of meaning-making and decision-making are shared across biological and technical entities. So what Hayles wants us to know is that we are all in the stream of AI and this shared meaning making that we are implicated in, whether we realize it or not, or whether we accept it or not. And we are part of this system. Because of that, she's encouraging feminist and diverse creators to participate in the process and not just critique it, to open more equitable and sustainable futures rather than reinforcing kind of the limited options that we perceive that we have.
Okay, thanks for summarizing that, Eva. You actually touched on some things I forgot you said. I should probably add that to my growing pile of disagreements and notes. Maria, do you want to propose your thoughts first, or at least a thought first, before I start ranting and raving?
Well, I think the ranting may be collaborative. I did want to note that I do like the explicit calling out of like metaphors as being important and of languages impacting future meaning because it's actually more my regular space. I'm going to leave the cyborg stuff to Tessina because I think you're better equipped to discuss it. But I did have some thoughts around the difference between Lick's earlier 1960s stuff and her own because I actually read that 60s stuff as part of my master's because I studied human computer interaction, especially AI, because that was my whole deal at the time. Um, because there are definite problems with his framing, but I think that she's not reading him as generously as would be maybe appropriate because he has this idea that once we get fast enough computers, it will be a symbiotic relationship because the computers can help the machines and vice versa. And although he has like agency is primarily initially with with people, you can't help something that has no agency, right? Like you can't help a hammer. So he already had a more archaically phrased and coming like, in the 60s. Uh, he had an idea closer to the idea that she proposes than I think she's willing to admit. And I, at the very, very end, have some issues with her closing topics, which in my notes I summarized as don't be so harsh and try to ally with people in power. And I'm not sure that's a great strategy in general, but we'll get there. Um, but I think I vote that unless anyone wants to pick any of those, particularly we allow Tessina to ask the cyborg stuff.
Is there anything you wanted to say, Eva, or should I start ranting?
I have some thoughts. I thought that I thought the overview is helpful, and I agree that there is a place to build on all of these historical perceptions naturally, right? Without it invalidating the relevance of this is what we thought then, obviously in 1960s. Now we have to update our understanding. Um, I'm, I mean, I maybe we can incorporate this into our discussion because I'm torn about one thing that I think is personally I think is quite funny. I really get the need to decenter from this anthropocentric perception because the anthropocentric perception got us here, right? And at the same time, I find it actually maybe an overlooked and cute and interesting aspect of this point where we are at now, that we start to like humans again, in a sense that, humans are the worst. Look what we've done to the environment and so on and so on. And suddenly we are in the situations where, we want to protect people's ability to have jobs. We appreciate human craftsmanship. And so there's this tension of how are we going to integrate that where this emergence, of another kind of agent that is with us in this in the stream actually makes us look more kindly maybe at our own kind, which also relates to the idea of the kin, maybe. So
no, I think that's good and sensible. Just on the anthropocentric words are awful.
Say either the A word.
I do think a lot of the problem with how we got here is not just that we were centering people, but we were centering specifically white men,
yeah.
like relatively privileged, which she calls out, but I think doesn't disentangle from just anthropocentric.
Yeah, I think
issues.
that's actually a very important distinction.
Yeah. Well, we're all in the stream.
Yeah, I had some notes about that A word that I can't say either. But I'm gonna start with the two things out of the whole paper that I agree with. And thank you, Shadow, for announcing your presence. All right. Here you go. So I agree that algorithms are a way to design social structures. That was a comment that she made in the paper, and I do think that's true. I think we always think of algorithms from the perspective of technology, and we don't realize how we can actually encode things into other systems without technology. And Ruha Benjamin, in her book Race Against Technology, I think it's called, she talks about that, about how racism is an algorithm that is baked into the US system. And an example that she gives is, for instance, how you calculate a Black person as 3/5 of a person in order to then calculate the Electoral College that is still used today to decide who becomes president of the United States. So it's an algorithm that was, what was that, Eva?
What, I mean, what is it? It seems like something.
It's so in the US, when the slaves were free, and then when there was the possibility of them voting, the US government decided how they were going to calculate how much power each state had. Well, the problem is you've just freed thousands, millions of slaves in the conservative South.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would have drowned out the voice of white conservative voters. And so in order to counteract that, the government decided to basically count Black people as 3/5 of a person in order to then kind of tweak the population so that it couldn't overthrow the white voice in a sense. And that calculation decided how we decide which states have the most power or carry the biggest votes towards the total vote that then decides who is president of the United States. And this was done many, many years ago, and that's still being used today. So that is a form of racism that was just baked into the democracy of the US, the beacon of democracy, and that is what it was built on. So that's an example of how an algorithm can become systemic, and it is based on calculations, mathematics, but it is racist, and it is still being used today. Eva, the look of absolute.
I mean, because I thought that I understood what you meant, but what I didn't understand is like there is no way this is still being used today.
No, it's still being used. That's what the Electoral College is based on, and you can look it up if you want.
No,
I knew of it
I mean
when
that's
I
just
lived in the
totally short.
US.
That's just
Yeah. I knew of it when I lived in the US. But in a way, I kind of thought maybe it's exaggerated. But to read a book by a professor from, where is she from? Princeton, I think, to rediscuss this, I was like, oh, okay. So this is still a thing. But yeah, or even how the police were formed in the US. The police were formed to catch the slaves that ran away. And we can see how well that's gone for current policing in the United States. They haven't come very far. So this is what I mean when I say I agree with her, with the author, that it is possible to bake certain algorithms into a system without technology. We didn't have AI back then, but somehow that was able to become, it was built into the social structure and into things that decide the future of a country, like the voting system or law enforcement or the criminal justice system. So that was a very interesting point she made that I do actually agree with that one. And I do agree about forming alliances. But my question is, who is taking one for the team on this one? As Maria said, I still have some misgivings about playing nice. I think it just kind of factors into, I mean, we know the demographics that she is referring to that has completely dominated tech and AI and the IT industry. And these are people who are not necessarily used to being told no and you're wrong, which has helped to feed the ego that has taken us to where we are now. And I think that playing nice can be effective in some instances, but to what degree? Because we're still, who's going to kiss their ass, basically, is what I want to know. It won't be me. So, who's going to take one for the team to be able to do that? I do think there should be some alliance. It's just at what cost, and who is going to take one for the team? Who is going to be sacrificed in that alliance? It seems like a tricky road to walk. And again, we end up enabling the people that we should be holding accountable. So I agree with the alliance. I don't know if that's the best way to do it. I guess is what I'm arriving at.
I'm kind of same. I have a friend who's really, really mad at like women in tech events because they're just like, well, okay, but then we're getting a bunch of women into tech to have a terrible time, like notionally eventually to improve things, but like there's a whole balance there that's probably like outside of the scope of this paper realistically, but it's a yeah, good call out. An amount of labor there that is not fun and not necessarily effective. Um, yeah, the calculation of that algorithm is awesome.
I have a whole section of complaint just on what you just said alone. But before I continue my rant, does Eva want to say anything else?
No, about women in tech. I was a woman in tech, right? And it was something I've been trying to forget ever since. And I thought, yeah, it's interesting that this comment is coming from still someone that is a critic, I think, and is a woman in academia, which I'm not sure is much better. But I think about women in tech events, there's something kind of wrong about like getting women to just marinate in their own sauce of like okay, this is your little playground of women in tech. So it's complicated, but I have to say,
and they have somewhat improved.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah.
But I have to say, this call to action from the paper did make me think, to what extent it's necessary to go beyond critiquing, right, and be more actively involved, and what does that look like, even for me personally, because I was saturated with it and wanting to be out and look at it from the outside, but I think there is no outside to speak of, and that is accurate.
No, I agree that there's no outside. I just don't know that the solution is as simple as it's framed, I guess.
Agreed. I'm going to continue from that part of my notes. So I said STEM has treated the diversity problem in tech as a supply chain problem, but that fails to explain why the women and minorities they attract do not stay. It's interesting. Maria has obviously worked in tech. Eva has worked in tech. I have worked in tech. We've all been women in tech. And where are we now?
Greener pastures.
Either we picked a role that's adjacent so we can just dip our big toes in there and collect a little extra money and stay safe. But none of us are like actively coding, programming.
I mean, I'm actively coding and programming, just not around a bunch of tech guys.
That's fair, but that's still adjacent because it's like, let's say, academia.
I mean, I also still help on some industry projects, but
that's
like,
fair.
But I only deal with them on my terms.
Of doing it on your own terms,
which is a wildly privileged thing to be able to do.
Yeah, and I mean, I do technical writing, but I'm not around tech bros either. I'm alone at my desk with my cat. So I have also like just found a way to be on the outskirts of this thing without being actively participant. I experienced so much like vitriol and hatred from men when I decided to switch to tech. And I was so surprised because some of these men were friends that I had had for years. And I Amy said she's going to escape and some of these were men I had as friends for years. And I mean, these were people who were multimillionaires, for example, and felt I was worthy of having a conversation with about money and investment. But when it came to me moving into tech, it was like this, like I offended them personally. And I was so shocked by just the response that they had. And I do wonder if some of these men who in any other instance respects women and respects our opinion or qualifications or thoughts or advice, but when it comes to tech, it's like it's their domain. And I've spoken with women who have worked, women in STEM who have worked in tech. So let's say biotech versus actually working in a biolab versus actually being in academia. And tech is outstandingly the worst one. Women run. So again, I just don't think that treating it as a supply chain issue is the problem. If the actual situations don't change, attracting more people isn't going to do much. All we're going to do is leave and tell everybody else, don't go there. It's terrible. And the persons with the greatest grit and forbearance to stick it out in tech and AI are probably not very responsive to pretty words. I don't think that Maria or I were like, these words sound nice. So she will continue coding in her own way, and I will be a technical writer. It's great because the metaphors were just so amazing. No, it's because we knew that it was absolute crap. So we found an avenue that worked for us in different ways while still being either adjacent or just joining when we feel like it and being able to escape when we don't want to be like 24/7 immersed in the tech industry. Maria, I see that the wheels turning. What do you want to say?
And we have chosen to mostly be like outside and more splintered. I don't think it would be against the spirit of the paper, or but would still potentially be like an okay solution to, escape and do our own thing over here, like as a group, as opposed to more splintered, which might be okay. Let's have more communication. Let's have more space for technosymbiosis if you want. So there isn't also just in the pool with the sharks or outside of the water entirely. We could go find a nice lagoon that had no sharks. My metaphors have gotten away from me, but that is the theme of the paper, so that's on point.
Eva, did you want to add anything before I continue my rant?
I'm thinking about the condition of our lagoon. Because I'm looking at this part of the paper, right? It will be important to form alliances, collaborations, affinities with those who control the development of AI technologies, which we have seen are predominantly men. I don't see, what we are dealing with is such concentration, right? I think of the dominant models that I don't think how we can, like, even if we organize here together and we are forming an alliance, we are the AI Book Club with the critical approach. Let's go and form an alliance or collaboration with some old man, right? Like, it's not very relevant to them because of the concentration of power. So that requires maybe higher level of organization where we can, I think it's more about creating alternatives potentially, but we are systematically disadvantaged. We're now going to create another like ethical alternative. It's really hard from our position. So it's really hard to have an alliance where we are not subservient to the dominant players.
That's 100% valid. And also part of the risk of studying up. So we can say even academically, we're challenging the status quo, especially your research, Eva, and mine. There is studying up involved. Well, we are not critiquing or looking into a primitive society that probably won't read the paper. We are actually critiquing the power structures, the same people who might decide if we get into a university that we want to do a second and third PhD at, or if we want tenure as professors, or want to go back into the industry but in a different capacity, such as AI ethics consultants or something of that kind. These are the people who decide that. So it is a very risky and tricky position to be in, to also from an academic standpoint critique them. It's like the same job that you need to do to qualify for being like the guardian of society, in a sense. If you get into AI ethics and safety, can mean you don't get that job. And there's an irony in that, because then the people who do get that job have no interest whatsoever in standing up for the people that they are supposed to protect. And if we notice, a lot of the AI ethics and safety teams that are built at these companies, including OpenAI, they don't last, or the teams end up leaving because those who are actually focused on building safe AI or safe AGI, if that's their goal, become so disillusioned with fighting against the stream of what corporate actually wants, that they realize it's not effective. And so when you look at people like Ilya, who was one of the chief scientists behind ChatGPT, if even he felt that he couldn't swim against the stream and open AI, can you imagine one of the rest of us? And that is a very daunting thought, I think, to process and to sit with from an academic standpoint, and from like a professional or future professional role as well.
We didn't buck the trend. We went straight for the most depressing topic of the paper, as per usual. So at least we're consistent.
At least, yes, we're very much on brand.
Oh.
I totally agree, and I think it's a big risk, but I think you have a moment where you say, like, if I'm going to do this, I will do this. Otherwise, I might just stay, like, deeply embed myself within the structure just for personal benefit, right? So I think it is really hard, but how satisfying it is to say whatever the hell you want.
Thank God for GCAS, which allows us to say whatever the hell we want and then publish it on the school channel. Yes, academic freedom at its finest on YouTube. So the other part of the paper that I took issue with, and this is more of a general look, I have 7 pages worth of complaints. The other part I took issues with is I have an aversion to discussing semantics when people are adversely impacted. And I remember when I first started my PhD at GCAS, and overall, because there was another school I had considered before GCAS, and it was also an interdisciplinary department, STS. And after a few months, I realized I am more of a social scientist. I am not a humanities person at all. And I very clearly just sat in my camp and stayed over there, because humanities people love to argue semantics, and it gets on my nerves, especially as somebody who is from the third world. I left at 26 years old. So I know what it's like to have those experiences. And it's like, while you're actually suffering, there's people in the first world deciding what to call it. I don't care what you call it. Send relief, or shut up and leave us alone. So it's I don't know. I think it's a first world privilege to be able to pause, think, debate, and demand eloquence in these situations. However, I do understand the first world importance of using the right language, because at the end of the day, that is where most of the resources are concentrated. And if you can't use convincing language to discuss something with the people who are going to make the decisions, then I mean, how are you going to persuade them? You still have to persuade them. So there's still 2 sides of that coin. And I said, not by coincidence, the developed countries is where it matters most, because that's where the technologies are made that impact everyone else. And the author asks us to remember that people in the global north, especially the US, can't discuss AI from the sidelines because they are not separate from the issue. And specifically, it was on page 11. I'm going to read that quote of what she said. Such critiques assume that there exists an exterior perspective from which one can criticize without oneself being implicated in the problem. No exterior position exists for those of us living in the global north, which now includes me, darn it. Whether we are aware of it or not, we are all implicated through the data scraped from websites, gathered through surveillance cameras, or voluntarily given up for some small good or service. And I remember Eva was it last time Eva was like, poison your data, be fake on social media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm all about it.
I remember that.
I think,
but yeah, I think that the whole argument of semantics just it gets under my skin. It's such a humanities thing to do. And I see the value. I have this aversion to it. And Amy says, I really think there's an assumption here that the small part of us that is captured in data is enough to render us impossible of being external, and I kind of don't agree. I guess in this sense is that our data is still part of it's not necessarily that you have agency or that you are the cause of the problem, but that your data has been swept up in the problem. And so what becomes relevant for people in the global north becomes applicable to people in the global south, whether that's the case or not. So for instance, the AI is going to learn to calculate things, whether it's for criminal justice, for healthcare statistics, for giving out social benefits based on how it works in the global north. And then the global south decides to apply the technology, and they have to deal with that difference for like employing a system that was not built with their demographics in mind. And I don't think we can escape that. So it's not our fault, but we have been wrapped up in the problem. Okay, Amy says that makes more sense.
Yeah, like the externality is like the petty criminal is still like a part of the capitalistic structure, even though they have no power in that. But if they had a different structure, there would be different people, different types of people. The whole thing. You're not fighting the cyborgs?
That's the next part. I told you
Okay.
I have a long list of
I was
rants.
very much reading this paper going, oh, Tessina will have a thing about that one.
yeah.
Which is a very fun way to read a paper.
There was one particular moment, I think, where I thought about Tessina specifically. When she talked about the cyborg also began to be an unhealthy object of fascination for some scientists, such as Kevin Warwick, who had various well-published implants that have made him, he claims, a literal cyborg, right? So that was really funny because he considered it like something really unique. I said, like, look, I'm a cyborg. I'm the only one, right? And I think here there is a lot to unpack, which I'm sure Tessina will take us through.
Yeah, let me get to the cyborg section of my notes. You just give me a moment, please.
Warwick and Kurzweil, not my favorite people.
I saw Kurzweil in person in San Francisco in April, and everything that we are, I shouldn't say that, but everything that we are talking about transhumanism, I don't know how old is he now, but like definitely he's not on track to transcend his physical body, let's say.
Maybe he's exactly on track if the physical body cannot sustain the spirit.
Yeah, like body and mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know anything about him. When I saw the name in the paper, I looked it up. I was like, oh, that guy. But
We had so many lectures about him in Computers in Society
really,
that I'm over the concept.
yeah, he's probably not the best poster child for transhumanism then. So
yeah, seems like just someone that is making rounds on all the conferences that are out there. Talking about something that's like most of his work, I think it's been a really long time ago now.
I think there is a bit of propaganda at the moment, to be honest, about like living forever that's spreading amongst the wealthy in particular. I mean, if you have enough money to last you for several generations, can you imagine living with the realization that you only have one? Just one? Why? I have enough money to last me till the end of time. I want to spend it all and enjoy living this fabulous life, especially if they weren't born with money. And so it wasn't just a condition of their existence. It was something that happened when they were in their 20s or 30s or 40s. It's like, darn it, rich people had 40 more years than me to do this. I want to extend. So I didn't even get a generation. I got half a generation. That's not right. So I don't know. I have noticed this growing interest in transhumanism to the point where it now has diverse versions of it. I don't know. It's getting into that weird cult like vibe, to be honest. Some of the ones that I have seen and the level of strictness they follow with the routines to preserve the mind and body so that they can make it to being able to transcend into their AI or holographic form. I don't know, it's creepy.
Do you know any woman transhumanist that wants to live forever?
That is such a good question. All the ones I know are men. That is such a good question.
I mean, there are a few of them, right? But no woman comes to mind. And where my mind goes, and I can't help it because after I read the Silvia Federici, right, and Caliban and the Witch, is the only place where my mind goes, is that all of that interest and kind of the cult of ability to sustain the body, which is a male body, and also maybe trying to defocus from the body as the one and only place where your mind and like kind of yourself can live. It's all related to wanting to devalue and defocus from the fact that women give birth.
I agree with you. I've always felt that there was a little bit of womb envy when it came to AI. Women have, cornered the ability to create life. And I think that a lot of these tech bros really struggle with that concept. It's that last thing that's remaining that they want and they can't do it. You still have to depend on a biological woman to have that function. And I think the ability to create this thing that thinks and can at least simulate some resemblance of human features and human behavior, it's like in a way fulfilling that uh, desire to create life that they don't have the biological means to do on their own. And of course, there are women who can't either, right? We're not talking about them. I'm being binary in this discussion, but I do think that there's some womb envy involved. Like they've wanted to create life in their own way, and so when they did it, it couldn't just be let's make it human. It had to be superhuman. It had to be artificial super intelligence. It had to be better than what was biologically created by a woman because of this competitive nature. I don't know. It's still a theory that I'm working through, but I do think that there is some womb envy involved in this obsession with AI technology that you find, especially among men, and especially among men who are, what was it again? Doomers and boomers? Was it boomers? The ones who are really pro AI. So your transhumanists, your AI is going to be great. It's going to solve all the world's
I think
problems.
so. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
it's
so.
mostly men, even to the point of uh, over exaggerating what the current or even the future technology is actually capable of. Women, I think, for the most part, give far more conservative estimates or have far more conservative perspectives or perceptions of current AI and what it will be capable of in the future. So I don't know. I think that's an
I did
interesting in the tech bro community.
I did go try to find some transhumanist women, and there were four on one blog, and I didn't recognize any of them. Which is in terms of life extension, which is not exactly the same thing and has nothing to do with AI. If anyone is interested in a novel about life extension and from a feminist perspective, the trouble with lichen or lichen, I don't know how to pronounce that word either, is a very, very old book that you may be interested in. But I will not spoil the
Yeah,
main plot. I just wanted
definitely.
to flag it.
She also says something that I find interesting. She says, I think there's envy of general humanities fields as well. They're aware that even with all their wealth, they haven't acquired the broad appeal they see in artists and writers and other creatives. It's an insecurity, no matter how technically able they are with math, code, etc. They can't meet those more creative goals. I think of Elon when I read he has such this like strong desire to be cool, to be the cool
and
guy.
and
And
like
it's
there are a lot of tech people who will be like, oh no, I am creative with my code. And some of them are not. But the ones who actually are creative aren't as weirdly like I must know all of the 15 minute summaries of all of the books
no,
for clout.
absolutely. Because to create happens in many different ways. For most biological women in the world, that is, you can give life. So you already got that. For other people, especially those of us who don't want kids, whether we can make them or not, that form of creativity or creation takes other forms. Maybe you write, maybe you make music, maybe you code. Coding can be a creative endeavor as well. But if you haven't really done anything creative and you just have math and haven't really learned to because you anything could be expressive if you have a creative spirit, but you lack the creative spirit. So I could see that envy being focused on less nice things for humanity, just to kind of preserve that ego and that feeling of, but I have created something more powerful than everyone else, and something that could rule everyone else, including myself. So
And
so
like
yeah.
I do think most people are baseline creative, like you give kids some crayons, they'll go make you weird monsters.
Mhm.
So there is also, just like since we're taking feminist arguments, there is also the thing where in order to be the successful tech person, you may have had to not be creative and not have free time and put all of your eggs in one basket that you now highly value. And so you did it to yourself, but you feel bad about it. And oh no, yeah, everything's bad because the system is
That's kind of fair. Except that with some of the ones that are very successful, I have actually been impressed by how creative they might be. For instance, Elias Sutskever, one of the chief AI scientists behind OpenAI and ChatGPT, he plays the piano and he plays it really freaking well, you know. And when you listen to him describe uh, his thoughts of AGI and ASI and where we're going and how it may or may not affect humanity, even the way he expresses himself, and to say that English is his second language, it's so poetic. There's this poetic nature to the way he speaks that you would think he's a philosopher. Even when he talks about what fascinated him with AI, it's actually a fascination with cognition, of how people think, of how things work. And so then maybe we ask the
But he's
question.
one of the people who originated the problem solving, not one of the people who jumped on the bandwagon and went, I'd love to give NVIDIA all my money.
No, that's
It's a
100%
different cohort.
That's 100% fair. And I think that's a lot of the early scientists who did work that actually counted towards building generative AI and other advanced AI systems. What we have now wasn't really their intention. Like the godfather of the internet, who was the one who had many thoughts and feelings about where things are now. There's Jerry Kaplan, there's Ilya, there's Eliezer Yudkowsky, who initially started off wanting to build AGI, and then around 2000, 2001 decided, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe we shouldn't do this. So it's kind of interesting when the moral questions start kicking in after they have already built this thing. They never thought about that. They're driven by this desire to create something, which is creative, right? But
yeah,
I don't know.
It's creative under a specific set of pressures, though.
That's fair. That's fair. But I
But
do
you know,
agree with
give
Amy.
us your cyborg grant. I've been waiting for the cyborg grant for so long.
Okay, so she criticizes cyborg theory for anthropomorphizing, I can never say this word, AI and technology. And she believes we shouldn't limit AI by viewing it through human lens, which is the same thing we saw with psychoanalysis of AI, same premise. But I think her proposal to grant it autonomy and think of it as a different but equal entity actually does worse. It makes AI an equivalent or alternative to human cognition or human experience, which I personally take issue with. I also think that the whole point of Cyborg's origin was precisely why Donna Haraway co-opted it in the first place. But she's kind of stating it now as if it's new. That, oh no, but did you notice that was the point? That was the whole point, was to take it back. So for those who might be here or listening later and don't know about the whole cyborg thing, cyborgs started as this theory or potential solution for how humans were supposed to survive outer space. So when we ship the humans off to Mars or whatever during the Cold War era, how are we going to make it possible for humans to be able to survive in conditions that we're clearly not built for? We can't breathe there, we can't walk there, we can't jump there, we can't do anything, not by ourselves anyways. So we needed to have some kind of technology augmenting our bodies in order for us to survive. And initially, I think the proposal was that we could just edit the actual body, the biological body. We can put different breathers, replace the lungs with something or whatever. But ultimately, they decided on the astronaut suit. And that's what ended up going. And so the only living examples that we ended up with for cyborgs were people who have disabilities. Those are people who literally have machines in their bodies that they have had to live with that are real life cyborgs. People who have heart transplants or that have a mechanical heart or a heart mechanical pacemaker, or people who are hooked up to a dialysis machine for several hours a day, or people who use a wheelchair even, or the fancy rich people who have an exoskeleton to help them walk. Or even in China recently, I saw this thing that you attach to your leg and it helps you hike faster and further. That is cyborg technology. Those are ways that we are augmenting our physical bodies with technology so that we can do things that we wouldn't normally be able to do on our own. And Donna Haraway deliberately took something that had a military background and co-opted for feminism. So I don't think that it's strange that transhumanists and other more, let's say, masculine endeavors would be like, hey, we'd like that back, you know? I don't find that strange. I think in some ways it's like pointing out the obvious. I don't think that there was anything to learn from this observation. I appreciate the observation, but I don't think that it undermines the value of cyborgs. The other thing that I thought with this is AI systems were literally built based on human language, human brain with the neural networks, etc. It's all based on humans. Or okay, Maria will catch me later, but so much of it is based on how we work and how scientists have tried to encode that into mathematics and actual code. So then why would it be wrong or inaccurate to judge something by the benchmarks on which it was built in the first place? So, I mean, I don't understand why that would be inaccurate. That part also made zero sense to me whatsoever. It's I would I would have preferred to hear it phrased as even though and so and so and so, but it's an immediate rejection of it. But that is the source of artificial intelligence. It was built on with humans as a base for how can we replicate this. So I don't think that it is possible to divorce it from that. In the same way that we can't divorce cyborg theory from its military background, we can't remove artificial intelligence from its human background. That was the benchmark that Google set when it thought that it should play Go and beat the human players. It was the benchmark that they set when they said, let's make it talk because that's what humans do. These are all human benchmarks. So, and that's by the creators of the technology. So I think we have to acknowledge that first before we make a proposal to say, let's call it something else. let's judge it differently. But anyways, I will pause with my rants.
No, I think that's all sensible. You said a thing. Oh, my unsure was just on neural networks being even vaguely related to how neurons work, but also they mostly used animal models to learn about the neurons, and we got it wrong, and it kind of worked mathematically anyway. So it was not a big point. I was just like, oh no, caveat. Um, having AIs as human built systems that can think, scare quotes everywhere, as an idea from like when we're discussing the Cyborg manifesto, when she moves in later to talk about Lick and making kin, she has a bunch of points in this paper where I'm just like, you've just redefined that topic, that concept. That's a real big topic for this paper without backing that up a huge amount, because I think she avoids having the discussion you want her to have by saying, well, thought is or cognition is any processing I do with inputs that has an output. And there was another one but I can't read my notes. I have notes; they're shorter than yours, but oh, it's Happy Thanksgiving. Um, uh, thought, and it was meaning as behavior, which is also like it's a view. It is a view that like you can take in psychology, for example, and philosophy. But those are two like really big claims that I think are doing the work of avoiding interacting with the concepts you're bringing up for the cyborg.
I noticed that as well, right? There was a point where she says, well, if we define cognition in this way, and so and so and so, and if we define meaning in this way, therefore, but especially around meaning, I was wondering what you think of it, and I can read that fragment. So what she started there was questioning the Chinese room experiment as a proof that there is no meaning, just through ability to interact kind of with the components. And give an output. And so she says, I argue in contrast that the computer's actions instead should be considered in relation to its interior and exterior milieu. I do not have the space here to demonstrate this claim, but suffice to say, the computer constructs relations between its algorithms, memory, hardware code, and logic gates that give its processes meaning relative to its functionalities. Similar to the signs that a biological organism creates that generate meanings specific to its capabilities and milieu, so that computer also creates, interprets, and disseminates meanings specific to its context. So she's kind of, how is she defining meaning here? As an ability to communicate between components with a particular intention, or?
I don't think she even needs an intention the way that she's defined it. And I think it's sort of circular to bring in the Chinese room, because she says meaning is when there's a holistic thing doing something. This is a holistic thing doing something. So it has meaning. And I'm like, it's not quite circular, but it's close.
That's the part of what I was complaining about, making AI an equivalent or alternative to human cognition or human experience is something that I take issue with. And the interesting part about her using that as an example of AI creating its own meaning, so we shouldn't use human lens to judge it. But then she has on page 14, an AI may be designed to produce verbal formulations that a human can understand. For example, OpenAI's GPT-3 program is now being used to power chatbots and other programs producing verbal responses to inputs by humans. Despite the semblance the program produces of having a conversation, however, what the words mean to a human and what they mean to the program are completely different. Whereas the human relates the words to the human life world, for the program, the words are constructed by transforming similar bit strings found on the web, blah, 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 blah. The program literally has no knowledge about what it feels like to hold a purring cat. It knows only that purr appears in certain contexts and is typically linked with corresponding keywords such as cat, pleasure, and so forth. Now, the whole point of communicating as a species in any species is so that both people understand each other equally well. That is the goal that we hope for. Now, that might not always be the outcome, but that is the whole point of communicating in the first place. And if you're telling me that the robot, the chatbot, doesn't actually understand what it's telling me, what it's giving me advice, you are so right. You really see the world differently. I appreciate you. Do that again. You know, it doesn't know what it's telling me, but I'm now taking it as advice. So is it really communication? And we don't have to look at humans. Look at bees, look at ants. They both have to, everybody has to understand each other in order for even these primitive forms of communication, for that to work. For people to know, or the bees to know, who's the worker bee, who's the queen bee, who, you know, what do you do, who's guarding the entrance, who needs to leave during mating season and come back later. Like, all of this is important because everybody needs to understand each other. So is it really communication? Is there actual meaning if the chatbot on the other end of the conversation in a so-called communication or dialogue does not actually understand me? And clearly, I don't understand it either, because who knows what those words actually mean to it? Mean.
So
yeah, I think go on.
No, I will just add that she doesn't consider maybe that meaning needs to have a symbolic layer, right? So she's saying meaning in this view does not require human language or symbolic manipulation. Rather, a behavior itself constitutes meaning generated by the organism's ability to connect to the environment through receiving and interpreting information. And so it's this kind of, she says, a dog wagging his tail, a whale singing, a clam opening its shell, all counts as meaning practices in this view. And one thing that I want to point out, which I'm not sure if matters or not, and it's complicated, is that all of these kind of like biological agents let's say that they create meaning based on their their position in the flow of, or what was it? But they are all kind of rooted in the world versus the aspect of the world from a different perspective, but they are in the world which we somehow share, versus when it's kind of this machine meaning making that she's describing. She says constructs relations between algorithms, memory, hardwired code, and logic states. So their world is a human-made environment, essentially. But this becomes problematic because obviously we have this technological component infiltrating constantly our environment. Our environment is heavily manipulated by technology, and so on, right? But I think there is a distinction there.
Yeah, no, I had a bunch of notes where I was just like, this is not entangled or embodied from just from computer symbiosis all the way down. After that, every time the paper talks about thought, it is even if the entity, even if it's talking about human thought, even if the entity is embodied, the framing of the paper is to not constitute thoughts as being necessarily embodied, I think. Like especially from the 60s Lick paper, but also it's never refuted later in her own framing.
Yep. I'll also add, Amy says, all the examples have bodies and continuity of experience, while AI systems don't have this. And to jump back on what Eva was saying last about the clam or oyster opening or whatever, and them responding to their environment, and in the paper with her also talking about how they respond to their environment and the stimuli. I am the environment. If we are having a chat, I am the environment, and I am who they're responding to. And it's not a meaningful response. It has just calculated some strings that it thinks will probably get it a thumbs up or something. And I don't think that's meaning. I don't know. That just doesn't seem like it constitutes meaning or cognition to me. And we've already had that discussion with the AI Com, which is the first book we did at AI Book Club, which talked about how it was just parroting phrases that it had pulled together from the internet. And that is how she describes ChatGPT herself here, to be fair. So that's why it's confusing to me about why she then considers that to be meaning.
Yeah, I think there's a mistake in the disembodiment and in those two definitions that is a problem with the paper. Although I like several of the thoughts behind the paper. Which is
a pity. The other thing about the cyborg theory that I thought was hilarious is that a lot of what she proposes as an alternative to cyborg theory is part of cyborg theory.
Yeah.
That was weird, because I'm just not really seeing a huge difference between what she's saying and what's already part of HCI, which is human computer interface, or STS, which is studying the interaction between society and technology, or between cyborgs, which takes a more intimate look at how people interact with technology and how technology interacts with them. I am not seeing where this is some amazing departure from what we already have. So I wrote, the depth of technosymbiosis is worth discussing, but I'm not sure this differs significantly from fields like HCI, cyborg anthropology, and STS. And the page that I had pointed out, page 10, let me see what it was that she said precisely.
I like that you have page notes. I'm not that organized.
The depth of this technosymbiosis measured by the extent to which human societies would suffer if all computers, routers, chips, transistors, and databases crashed, for example, from a high altitude electromagnetic impulse or an EMP. Since computational media now interpenetrate the infrastructures of the global north, the havoc such an event would wreak is enormous. Cars would not start. Banking systems would be thrown into chaos. Airplanes could not fly. The electric grid would crash, and so forth. Technosymbiosis, like symbiosis, usually brings benefits for both species, but it also introduces new risks and threat as well. What does she think HCI and STS talks about? What is the difference? I'm not seeing a difference. And yeah, but I do agree with what you said. Like, the statement is great, but this is again why I think arguing about semantics is stupid. We already have words for this. Cyborg anthropology works well. STS works well. Why do we need to call it a new word? It's ridiculous. But an example that I can think of that I have lived through was the power apocalypse in Spain when the grid went down in southern France, all of Spain, and I think all of Portugal as well. That was a disaster. I thought I was in an apocalyptic movie. It was so weird walking around outside. Before moving to Spain, lived out in the desert with my camper and was very self-sufficient. The world could go to hell and I would be just fine. I would still have water, electricity, everything, because I was completely self-sustained with, knowing how to harvest rainwater, or having a couple months supply of LP gas, or being able to use solar to run everything in my RV. So it was horrible to live in the city for the first time, and the power grid goes down, and I had nothing. I had absolutely nothing. My fridge worked off electricity, my stove worked off electricity, everything, the elevators, and that was my small experience. But there were people who died, who were trapped in elevators, who the trains stopped working. When I walked on the streets, even the supermarkets had barricaded their doors shut for whatever reason. So it was very, very much an apocalyptic experience. And I think it was the first time that I realized, like really, truly realized and understood how much technology, like how dependent we are on technology. And I don't mean us being stuck to our phone, but just the infrastructure overall. I mean, I couldn't pull money from the ATM. You couldn't pay for anything because in Spain, everybody just taps. Very few people walk around with cash, much less or even a credit card. So that was a very interesting experience for me. So I agree with what she's saying. I just don't understand why we need a fancy new word for it. It doesn't make any sense. But that's my thoughts.
I think she's trying to drag, especially like the HCI stuff from the 60s into modernity, but I don't know that there's enough stuff that is vastly different for it to be like a separate full thing.
I agree, which is why I said I don't see why it differs significantly from feels like. And HCI was the first thing on the list.
No, I know. I just I think the paper is like the tone of the paper is the problem, not necessarily.
I agree.
I'm not sure. Yeah, it's weird.
No, I agree. What she's saying is not necessarily wrong. It's the need to own the rightness and then unwillingness to acknowledge that other people were right too.
I'm unsure it's a visionary metaphor. It just might be a useful update metaphor.
That's fair. There was also another point where she said, make kin, not babies. And
well, I think that was from the other work though, right?
Yeah. That was from Haraway. So she's talking about Haraway's call to action of make kin, not babies. And the reason that she gives that this is not going to work is children are so pervasively desired in human societies that it is difficult to imagine many taking Haraway up on her proposal. Has she met millennials?
I mean, maybe not. Her peers are not millennials.
Has she met millennials? Has she met us? We were just like, what kids? Who? Why? How? a lot of people just decided that was not our ministry. We did not wish to do this thing that we were told to do. So I don't think that's actually true. For instance, in the third world, the global south, populations usually are on a triangle. So the younger population is on the base and the older population is up here. The population is always younger because young people are always having kids, and not as many survive to old age as in a first world country where you would expect it to have more resources and more social security benefits for the older population, like pension and being able to fund like needing to be in a nursing home or something like that. Jamaica now has a declining population, which is very unusual for a country that is in the global south, or for a developing country or a third world country, whatever you want to call it. That's not how that usually works. And when you look at the first world countries, that has been a problem for probably decades at this point. It's a problem in Spain, it's a problem in Germany. I mean, the population is growing, but a big part of that is from societies with women who don't have choices, like in India or in places in Africa, where it's not as acceptable for a woman to decide that that is not the path that she wants to follow. So I said, countries worldwide are facing population declines. When women have the choice, they quite often choose not to have children, to have them later, or to have fewer children. So I don't think that she's right about that whole make kin not babies thing being something that feminists in particular were just never going to take up, because we all want children. Even when you look at cyborg theory, a big part of feminists considering, or let's say a part of, maybe not a big part of it, but a part of it was that they thought, I wonder if we could like have a synthetic womb that we could just throw the kids into so we don't have to do this. Like that was a whole thing. So I don't really agree with that either, or I don't know why she thought that was wrong, given the trends. There's so many people now who are buying houses with friends, living as friends, not because they necessarily have to for financial reasons, like having a housemate, but because that is the kind of household that they prefer. Are bucking the trend on what we have told we're supposed to do from previous generations. I do agree with her saying, though, that pursuing kinship may have the possibility of creating an us versus them mentality where things like racism and xenophobia could thrive. But I mean, we could say that about anything. That doesn't mean that it's something that we shouldn't consider or pursue. And it also assumes that people who are making kins are making them within this specific group. Of course, there are friends who one person is black, another is Asian, another is white. That's normal. So I don't know why she had this assumption that if people made kinship with others, that it was going to be just other people who looked like them or who shared their culture or ethnicity or race or whatever. So I felt there was not a very strong argument on her case for why that was not a plausible proposal from Haraway. And I'm not a big fan of Haraway, by the way. So if I'm defending her, it's quite a thing.
Fair. Yeah, I have like more bone pickings, but I think mostly we agree. Oh, Amy has a hand.
Go for it, Amy.
I have a question. So it seems to me a lot of the metaphors proposed are evaluated on this assumption that we need a metaphor that includes humans and AI as equals. Does she justify that? Does the author justify that?
I don't know that they are actually equal in all metaphors, but they're close.
Yeah, I suppose there's no like oppositional metaphors that are taken seriously.
Mm.
Yeah, that's true.
I think there are like two assumptions here, which are maybe not completely articulated. And one is that like we should not be just anthropocentric because that's bad. And so we should somehow be more inclusive of all these kinds of relations that we are having. And the other one is perhaps that we are like we have no choice, and like this is here now, right? We are here with these non-biological elements in our environment, and we have to make sense of that, maybe. But it's not totally explicit, but I would think that's where this is coming from.
Actually, now that Amy has said that, I have a thought. I have another thought. The thought is, if we are coming up with a metaphor that is supposed to, as Amy puts it on equal grounds in a way, right?
Tessina,
Where is the human in
carefully.
Technosymbiosis?
You already broke philosophy once. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt.
But where's the human in Technosymbiosis? It's just tech. No, it's the first part of the word that we get goes to tech, and there's no human that follows. Where's the homo part? Techno homo symbiosis, techno human symbiosis. I mean, look at things like HCI, for instance, human computer interface. Cyborg assumes that it is human and machine, but technosymbiosis says what? The technology exists in society. It doesn't actually, where are we? So in a way, the metaphor actually allows technology to be placed above us. We have been erased from this, actually.
I think some of it's just the framing of the paper being part of like a collection of perspectives on algorithms and data, and so they're obviously going to center technology. But yeah, it would be nice to have alternatives exist. These are some. I don't know. Maybe she was laboring under a word count, though, given the Chinese room comments.
There were some studies that I read. I don't remember where they are now, even who did it. I skipped through it because it wasn't immediately relevant to my research, but they were discussing how women tend to gravitate to certain roles and away from certain roles, and how one of the reasons that tech is not an area that women tend to move towards is how cold it's described, and how like machine focused it is a lot of the times. So women, for example, in the sciences, a lot of women are in biology or in healthcare because there's a very direct human element to it. And so if we're talking about metaphors that are supposed to be effective at boosting the supply chain of women and minorities that are going to move towards tech, why on earth would you choose a metaphor that only further alienates those people, because that's not what actually appeals to them, as research has shown? So I don't know. I still think that the word choice is not the best. It's still proposing this as a solution that supersedes all previous solutions, and it's not seeming like a solution to me at all. So I don't know.
I guess symbiosis and ecological reciprocity are sort of almost biology-ish.
Biology, but not human.
Yeah. I'm trying to give points. I feel like I was very harsh, but I feel like I'm usually very harsh, so maybe that's okay.
Okay, so I do have one final bone to pick, and I'm sure that Maria will have something to say about this one. So on page 11, she talks about we shouldn't criticize these systems too much because we can just correct them anyway. And she says,
oh, I do.
I knew it. The ability to self-correct, in my opinion, is overstated. That's what I think. And I think of the Amazon case as a perfect example. So the Amazon case has come up in so much of my PhD reading. It's absolutely insane. And it is because around like 2014, 2015, I believe, Amazon decided, you know what would be great? We should just like automate the system that looks at resumes. This is a great idea. That's less work for the recruitment team, and we can focus on value adding strategies. And so that's what they decided to do, and they built the system. And in order to build it, they fed the model 10 years worth of resumes. Well, the problem is that Amazon is a tech company, and we have just talked about the supply issue as far as getting women and minorities into the field. So, not surprisingly, most of these resumes came from men. So the model then learned, I think I like men. So it started to not just prefer male resumes, but also to penalize anything that it thought was feminine. Even if a man had the word woman somewhere on his resume, down with away with this one. Drop the guillotine. Like, he didn't want that either. And they tried in many different ways to fix this system, and nothing they did corrected it. And within, in 2015, they just decided, well, there's nothing we can do. At this point, maybe it is fixable, but it's not feasible to fix it, given the resources we have already poured into it and maybe how much more it would take. So they completely disbanded the system. So I don't think this whole thing of we'll just feed it new data and it will fix itself is true. That is so overstated, and it really adds so much disrespect to the misalignment problem that we still have with AI systems. If it was that easy, we wouldn't have read some of the books that we've read. So yeah, we've read a few books that talked about the misalignment problem, and we had a misalignment exercise in one of these papers. So yeah, that was grossly overstated, the whole self-correction thing. Maria, do you want to add anything?
I think Ava has the thing before me.
Oh,
go ahead.
I think just a note on the system can self-correct, right? It can, but what are the incentives and within like what kind of realities it operates, which usually are not realities and incentives related to like pursuing pure truth and some kind of moral values, but usually just aligned to other things. So just the fact that it has the ability to self-correct is not an argument for anything.
Agreed. And sometimes because of how generative AI especially works, where hallucination is just part of the formula, you don't really know how it arrives at what it arrives at half the time. You have to kind of pull it apart and start looking again to reassess, which she herself points out on page 11, that although her argument is, what is the point of transparency when the algorithms will just change anyway, which that's such a weird way to because something changes, we shouldn't audit it. I mean, if I have a company, my expenses change every day. Does that mean I should not be audited by an external financial agency? I don't know. Her arguments
Maybe not.
Maybe not. I mean, that'd be great. I'd love to not have to check my numbers, but I don't know. The arguments are not particularly strong. Amy says, is there something to the fact that in practice the system can be corrected rather than operate on itself? I don't think the GAN example holds up. It's also reliant on data.
Yeah, so I think it's necessary that all of these systems are reliant on data, but I also think because she is framing the AIs as agents that are not systems that we would replace, that for her purposes, probably they need to self-correct, and having another part of the system observe, realize there is a problem, and then change it would maybe be shoehornable in, but it would require that all of the AIs were cyborgs in the other direction, I think.
That's fair. But even with what Amy said about that the system can be corrected, in the Amazon case, no. You can, but
You can correct the system by deleting the AI and getting a person to do it instead. That is a solution in a symbiotic system.
That's true. You've already heard my argument that I think that there are some use cases that we just shouldn't apply AI, or that we shouldn't use black box AI. We should have used
like I'm
white
fine if you want to throw a decision tree at practically anything. So yeah, on the self-correction thing, because it actually keeps coming up a lot because we're talking about AI, and that makes sense. If you, through magic, had a fully like generalized AI, it would probably necessarily need to be significantly more self-correcting than any of our current systems are. But we're talking about stuff that exists in reality. All of the AI systems we have are either hand-coded by people and fallible, but very correctable, but probably not entirely by themselves, or they are data-driven. And they're not just data-driven. There are some algorithms where it's just the data and like one rule, but most algorithms, you take some data, you build a model, and then you run the model repeatedly. And the model has limitations, right? If I build it is obviously clear that if I build a regression model, it's not going to find a pattern that can't be determined by a line, because the thing that a regression model does is it finds a line. But even when you scale that up, right, very big neural networks can find any particular function. They can solve for a particular function. So it's provable that a network could fully be retrained, but you would need more data than there are grains of sand on the planet for that to be possible for all combinations, and you would necessarily delete all of the other pieces of information, or you would take over the entire planet. It's not feasible that you have a constrained finite system that is trained in a particular way that you just need to make a small little tweak to. It's fine, where that small little tweak is actually a gigantic tweak. It's not possible. And I think I'm also going to pull a quote because I looked up while someone else was talking. But I don't think that the author has a deep understanding of models, which is insane given the master's in chemistry. But there is a line towards it's on page 8. I checked. It's toward the end of the 60s paper on HCI. But looking forward and looking at modern systems. So with contemporary AI systems, computers do far more than construct models to test hypotheses, which is what the 60s paper had wanted. They discern subtle patterns in very large data sets, also known as constructing models. They perform correlations that, in some view, make causal reasoning unnecessary, like correlations to test whether hypotheses hold. Those are the same things, and just reframing it like, yes, metaphor has a lot of power, but I don't think that the paper itself understands how different models are limited, and so is erring vastly on the side of it can change a bit, therefore it can change the entire thing. Like, yep, if you want to retrain it from scratch with data that doesn't exist, I will get off my soapbox. Put my soapbox.
No, I agree with you 100%. I think also an interesting thing is on page 15, where she presents her own loophole to this theory. It says, Amor gives a negative tone of these kinds of feedback and feed-forward loops when she warns that algorithmic systems must not be allowed to foreclose in advance the kinds of, and she names some ethical situations where they shouldn't do that. She astutely analyzes the problem of algorithms, querying databases as one of parsing a person as a series of attributes. These attributes can then be manipulated without knowing anything about the person as such, in much the same way that a gold ring dropped into an aqua regia acid bath dissolves into individual molecules, losing its identity as a ring. So the attributes dissolve the person into individual data entries that, when collated, become the reconstituted subject of data analysis. So she's already talked about how, the data that's in the pot is very hard to just take that specific thing back out. It's become part of the collective. And because it's part of the collective, and especially now because of how neural networks work, there's no guarantee that you take that thing out and somehow it just forgets. I feel like in the same
This
way
is
that our brains, even let's say somebody has a coma, right? And that has been, let's say, temporarily deleted. They can't remember why they like chocolate, but they like chocolate. Or they can't remember
delicious.
they can't remember what happened to them as a child, but they know that they're scared of dogs, for instance. It's like the outcome of that initial stimuli is still there. And in some ways, I think that AI does hang on to that kind of imprint. Once it's made its way down in the computations, removing the source doesn't really do much.
Even much simpler systems already do this. If I get a bunch of kids and I calculate their height and I work out the median and I only have the information in my model for height, which is just the median and maybe the min and max, I cannot then tell you or remove the third smallest kid from the bunch. Like, it's not even a function of complex algorithms. It's just if you aggregate and summarize, you cannot remove the base data. And obviously, which I think people forget. They're like, oh, it's maths, it's complicated maths. And I'm like, it has all of the fallibility of really simple math.
Yeah, and I think that they're forgetting that the reason why it's called generative AI. Now, granted, this paper came out in 2023, so we must give some level of forgiveness for the fact that
Generative
ChatGPT.
AI has been around since the 60s, and this author has cited at least a decade of baser generative AI.
That's fair, but
I'm being
we
mean.
realize we realize that she, at least from what we've seen, it doesn't seem that she grasps models in the way that you do. And I would say that for generative AI, maybe it's the fact that we can interact with it now, that so many of us have a much better understanding of it. But it's called generative AI for a reason. It does create something else when you give it the data. It's not, I mean, of course, it's parroting from the data that it already has, but it's still generating something that is at least a little bit different from that initial data or is organized differently. And so you can't really stop it from, i mean I mean we see the output, but there's still inner workings going on that stores some of that knowledge. For instance, when we have help me, Maria, what is the name of the, when you can see what the model is doing when it tells you?
Oh,
It's
the thing where we lie about, where it lies about it, or the actually taking it apart, because I don't remember what the first one's called.
no, the actual thing where, when, for instance, when you use perplexity, it tells you what it's doing. I am now
Yeah,
researching
I
so it's
press pad or
generating
something,
something.
or yeah.
It's generating something. Something is happening before you actually get an output.
But that stuff is itself generated, which isn't so. What you're getting when you look behind the scenes on those is not what's actually happening in the model
No, of
generally.
course, that's the lie that we're talking
Yeah,
about. But what I'm saying is that there's still something being generated outside of the output that we are getting based on all the calculations
yeah. Loads.
on the back end. And so we might think that we're fixing the output, but again, because it lies, you don't actually know that. It's very difficult to correct a system like that. I
It's
just think
only lying if you're relying on those sorts of outputs. If I'm building a model, I'm not relying on that. I'm going to be looking at the actual numbers that are flowing through the system, which is much slower and less cool. But there's nothing really to stop you. Like, a neural network is layers of fancy math. You
Mhm.
can kind of chop it out at any point and stick on a please generate now layer. The You can make them better or worse, but you can look into what's happening at each layer with relative ease. It just may not make sense until you spend a PhD or two on them.
Yeah, a
Is the
PhD.
problem.
It takes a lot of human resources to audit models. For instance, I know somebody now who works at a company that they're using Claude to generate a lot of their code. And I've asked, like, do you guys actually look at this? And he said, no, it's impossible. We can't look at every line of code this bot writes. It's thousands of lines. So, but you still want to look, right? You should still take at least pieces out and audit that and see how that goes, which is why I'm still arguing against her whole point about transparency. Calling for transparency does not matter. Not because we can't look at every single line of code and every single piece of work that's happening on the back end means that we shouldn't do it at all. It's better to do a little bit of auditing than to do nothing. It's better to understand it a little than not to understand it at all. I really don't understand that call that she made.
I think that she was looking at it like if you're in an assemblage and you have these two entities talking to one another. I actually had notes on this. Where am I going?
All right, while you look at
yeah.
your notes, I'm going to read the section so that if somebody didn't catch it, they know what we're talking about. So she said,
okay.
As Louise Amour points out in her recent book, when a cognitive system has the capacity to evolve, many criticisms of algorithmic governmentality miss their mark. Criticizing a system because it produces biased results, for example, when a face recognition program fails to recognize the face of a person of color, does not reach to the heart of the problem because the system has the ability to self-correct when the data is revised to include faces of people of color. Similarly, calls for transparency, for example, calls demanding that a corporation make its algorithms public, also misses the point because the algorithms constantly change as the system learns. So transparency at one point is obscurity at another. And that final statement is true. Transparency at one point is obscurity at another, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't audit it at all. But yes, Maria, now your
notes. So I was going to talk about a later point when she's talking about how technological agents and human or panda agents, and she's not disentangling different species, are in communication. Just to go, I guess, pull it back slightly more to meaning. There's an awful lot of discussion about how things are not transparent to either agent, because the computer can't understand what you were talking about because it sees you as data, because it sees you as a flat representation, which I think in the paper could have been phrased more cleanly. But there is an opacity on, like there's an opacity problem on both sides, and because we also can't understand the system, because who has time for that? We could actually understand the systems. It is not magic, but whatever. So I do like the framing of it going both ways. I just think that we already understand as people that the systems are hard to see. And I don't think that saying, well, so we shouldn't try is the solution. But I do like that she pulls out that the computers don't understand us either. And I would like more harping on that in general in writing. Please take note, people writing books that we will cover for the rest of time.
I think that's a fair observation. Is that part of your issue with categorizing emotions for systems?
No, my issue with categorizing emotions is the categories are bad.
No. I mean the research gap that you found. I mean, have you seen that be part of the issue where not only do we not understand the systems, but the systems do not understand us?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like I worked in social robotics, which the entire problem is the systems do not understand us. And I'm working in like building computational models for psycholinguistics, where the entire problem is that we don't understand people enough to build models that understand people. So like my jam is very much, these guys don't know what they're doing. They're little robots fumbling around in the dark. What if we help them? But like only so much. Like I don't want to help them to do state surveillance. I just think it would be fun for science if we could build some computer models sometime.
I think it goes back to what Eva was saying at the beginning, that it's interesting how artificial intelligence has forced us to look more intently and more intensely at who we are as people and what it means to be human, what it means to think, and maybe to value that human even though they have ulterior motives in understanding us better. But still, you know, there's now more research into things that maybe we previously only took for granted. So that's been an interesting turn of events from this focus on artificial intelligence. But I do think that it has also forced people to think of humanity in a way that is not necessarily a positive individual experience. For instance, with Eva's research, where she's looking at how people consider meaning, their personal meaning, personal sense of self, when they lose their jobs that may or may not have been replaced by AI. So I think that there's pros and cons to it. I just wish that in the end there were more pros than there were cons for the everyday person and not just for the billionaires.
I mean, they're complaining too this week. But yeah, no, I have a lot of problems with the paper, but I really like that it is a good paper for us to discuss more human topics.
No, it was a great choice. Shout out to Eva. It was a great choice. We did vote on it, but Eva was the one who presented the options, and this was the most popular of the ones that we looked at. But it was kind of like the AI con. I hated the book, but but I love that we read it, and I always recommend it to people that they should read it and form their own opinions. I think sometimes it's good to get out of your echo chamber and interact with what other people um, have to say and think about topics that are important to you, or even topics that you consider yourself an expert on. So that was interesting. And I do agree with the overall premise of the paper and the goal of the paper. Let's make AI and tech more diversified, because if we get a more diversity of people in building the technology, then the technology will reflect less of the values of a specific demographic that does not work for society on a whole. But the word choices, and the irony of that is that it's a paper on having the right word choices and the right metaphors in order to attract people. So yeah, I don't know.
Good.
Still good choice though.
Ava, we've been talking so much. Do you have more winding up or
I
anything?
think it's a good moment for us to conclude. It was a good introduction ahead of next week that I'm really next month
Good.
that I'm really looking forward to. I agree about the human and humane topics, and we will have a lot more, also of feminist perspectives, I think, which will be very interesting for next month. So that's good from my side.
Well, before we completely conclude, we have also been talking so much that we haven't asked if anybody else wants to say anything.
Oh yeah.
We got so
Sorry,
far.
Amy was chatting so much that I just sort of figured that other people would jump in, but I'm awful.
That's fair. But did anyone else want to comment on any of the issues that we brought up, or you have separate thoughts on the paper or about the meeting, anything that was said? Anyone else want to jump in? Going once, going twice, and
Get a
sold
gavel.
to no one. I guess we can conclude. Well, thank you to everyone who took the time to join us, and also to the people I know will just watch this on YouTube afterwards. We're very grateful for your attendance as well. And we will see you guys next time when we talk about the actual book. Oh, thank you, Kaylee. She says, I love the discussion. Thank you all. Yes, we're really looking forward to doing the book. And this is actually a chapter from the book. So I am
So
sure.
we'll skip it.
Yeah, we'll skip it. Yeah. So I'm sure next month we will have even more to discuss with all the many other chapters in the book. Again, you do not have to read it, but you can. or at least skim through this paper. Reading the book is always the responsibility of the panelists. But of course, if you read the book, then you have more opportunity to engage, which we always welcome. All you have to do is raise your hand or put something in the chat, or we'll ask at the end, as we do now. So that's it from us. Goodbye to everyone.